So just as we need clean water for safe swimming, we also need clean water for shellfish farming in our bay. Morro Bay has two commercial oyster farms. The Morro Bay Oyster Company grows their oysters out in the bay, and they put them in mesh bags, and those bags are attached to lines, and then there's a float attached to the end of each bag. So the tide will come in and the float will rise, and so the bag will tip in one direction, and all the oysters fall to the other side of the bag. And then the tide goes out and the float drops and the bag tips in the other direction and all the oysters fall to the other side of the bag. And so in this way, the oysters get stirred and mixed up, and so that they don't grow all interspersed and clumped together. And that way their shells get nice and thick and they develop that classic cupped shape that you like to see in an oyster. So this particular farm has a depuration facility. And so that's a building on shore. It's located on the Embarcadero near the Coast Guard station. And the building has a series of tanks and piping and filters and pumps. And so what they do is they take water from their lease area in the bay and they boat it up to their depuration facility. They fill the tanks. It runs through all the filters and piping to clean it out. And then when the waters in the bay are not quite clean enough to safely harvest an oyster, they can put the oyster into their depuration tanks, let it sit for a while, that will filter it out, and then the oyster is safe to go to market. The second farm is the Grassy Bar Oyster Company, and they also grow their oysters in mesh bags and utilize that tipping system. They do not currently have a depuration facility, but I understand that they are in the process of developing one. So on this map, all these cross-hatched areas show locations where shellfish farming could potentially occur. The areas that are colored orange are areas where the water quality is not clean enough to support shellfish farming, or there's a lack of historic data showing how clean the water is. The farmers have to pay for the testing themselves, and it can get pretty expensive. So it doesn't really make sense for them to test in an area that they don't plan to use. Then the green cross-hatched areas are areas with a history of water quality data that shows that the waters are clean enough for safe shellfish harvesting. Each of these dots represents the location of a long-running monitoring site, and then the color of the dot indicates the fecal coliform bacteria status. So the indicator that they're testing for is fecal coliform. And the green color indicates that the fecal coliform levels are low. The bacteria levels are good. So this graph shows one of the dots on the previous map, just broken out by year from 2014 to 2018. So the average bacteria needs to stay below this red line. And as you can see, the levels are well below the level of concern, that red line. And so what we see is a decreasing trend since 2015. And so that represents a change in the management of the shellfish growing areas. So it used to be that the areas would be open year-round, and then the farmers would test to show that the waters were clean enough to stay open. But when they did an analysis of about a dozen years of data, they noticed that the data from about October through January was pretty much always poor. The water quality was poor. And so what they decided to do was institute a seasonal closure, meaning the farms would automatically be closed from January or October through January. So when you look at the data just for the other portions of the year, you can see that yes, it's much cleaner. And the takeaway message, the important thing to remember with shellfish farming in Morro Bay is that there are very few areas in the state where the water quality is clean enough to support shellfish farming. And so really we should feel fortunate that Morro Bay is one of them.